Okay, I wanted to try to be quick and to the point today. I have a tendency to meander though, so let's see if we can tighten this up. Vectorization of your table. Okay, vectorization of your table. Now, by vectorization of your table, I essentially mean a row. So every point, every piece of information, right? The terminal piece of information that you want to be able to model within the group context, right? The respect to the group context, you want to be able to capture that reliably. And right now, this is a table that is multi-header, right? It's not this piece of information here is not a vector. It's not a row. It can't be contained as one coordinate. Okay? You've got foundation, and then you've got two other qualifiers, one of which is subordinate to the other, stacked vertically. So this data point here is a kind of triangulation, which is, in the case of just running a Power BI graph, it's not a good setup. Okay, in fact, it's an unworkable setup for quick analysis, for automation, etc. Couple of those challenges that it presents are really maybe not intuitive at first, but when you understand the hooks of how Power Query works, and again, Power Query is both within Excel but also Power BI, right? The query editor is where you bring the data in for cleaning, and then when you load that clean data into your model, then that's what you run the graphs off, right? Well, one of these challenges is that, firstly, if you add another column here, depending on the transformations that you've done, you will likely have your model fail, okay? Because columns are very critical in Power BI and Power Query generally, and Excel as well. Columns are the hooks of the table, and the tab is ultimately the hook of the file, and the file is the main landing point for your query, right? If you change the file name depending on the filter you've set, the query could fail, right? So if your filter is generic enough, then it could pick it up still if you change the suffix of the file name. But again, if any of your transformations within the query editor are betrayed by changes in the columns or tabs or file name of the file, then the query will fail. And it's not unworkable, right? You can go in and reconfigure the query, but who has who has the time to do that again and again and again and again? And that's what ultimately happens if your table is not set up properly, right? So in this case, I'll show you what we have to do to get this in a good position, but ultimately it's the unpivoting, right? Because we're going to have to transpose it and then unpivot it, and you'll lose that. That's where the failure will come in, right? Because we have to essentially transpose, but what I mean by that is rotate the table and then unpivot the remaining columns. That that will create an issue, right? The other challenge is query, as you see, does not pick up on your ornamentation, right? So you can color your stuff here just for readability within the Excel, but it's not going to pick up on your colors. It's not going to pick up on your merges. Okay, so take a look at this table, and then this is an unfiltered version of what the data looks like. So this change type is an automatic transformation. So this is literally me querying in this table and noticing, if it doesn't jump out at you already, this is not ready for a graph. I now have a column, a subordinate header, right? Part of that double header. It's now a data point associated with a blank in column 1, which is supposed to be phase discipline. So immediately we've got to make some transformations. Now I'm going to do that, and this is what is the workaround, right? A lot of the times the people who make these Excel files, they are trying to do two things at once. And I think it's really part of an older way of seeing data management and presentation. It's when the person is trying to turn the log into a dashboard, right? And Excel can be dashboard friendly, but if you want to go beyond your Excel table, then it's no longer a dashboard, right? It's now a warehouse for a further delivery that's going to take place down that last mile as part of that last mile. So this is fine if this is the end point. But what often happens is that the person who's in charge of this file will set it up like this, and they give themselves a little slow clap, and it makes sense. But then someone will say, it's usually one of those PMs that want to take their data to the next presentational level, and they'll say, whip this into a Toyota Corolla dashboard for me. And I'll say, well, restructure the table. Oh, we can't because that's how it's structured. Okay, well, if that's the case, best case scenario is you don't capitulate to that as the person who's ultimately going to have to do these transformations. You work with the file owner to essentially remodel the data within this file in a way that suits the further downstream analysis that is being asked of us as a data team, as a project controls team. And you explain this to all the stakeholders that are both resisting and encouraging further downstream processing of this data. But barring that, right, if that does not work, then you've got to take it into query and do the transformations I'm going to show you. But the way you want to handle this is you want to be able to click on anything here. So say 300 for quantity consumables, right? We want to be able to capture that information horizontally. Okay, right now we essentially have it as a triangulation, as a kind of cross. It's a coordinate, right? But in graphical form, right, we want to have this fully explained within the other associated corresponding rows. Right? We essentially want to vectorize our table so that each row forms a terminal coordinate. I'm going to show you how to do that. So best case scenario, you remodel the base data and you tell the person who's setting this up, and as part of that, the whole team that's associated with it, the whole stakeholder team associated with that, and you tell them why it shouldn't be set up this way, because it's not the final stage. If it were the final stage, this is great. But since it's no longer the final stage, it needs to be modeled differently, right? It needs to be set up like a boring CSV table. But barring that, right, if that won't change, then we can change it in here. So I'm going to assume that you've brought things into query before, and you know how to kind of play around with things. So you saw what I did there, right? We're going to make the first row a header. Oh no, what are you doing? Okay. We're going to make the first row a header, but what just happened, right? We had beautiful merges and colorings and everything, and ABC, labor hours, labor, or ABC, where's my labor, right? So again, there's a few different workarounds that you can do. We got to handle this blank too, because this hours and cost, these are now columns that have been treated as a row in Power Query. And so we we need to change that. We also need to do the same with the other columns. So again, this is what I mean when I tell people I have to reconfigure things. This is what it looks like. This is what I mean, right? And you can see that if you added a column, right, there'd be another column out here, presumably, and you'd have the same problem again and again. Now, this is what I typically do. So the one thing you could do, you could go in here and label it. Let's do that. That seems intuitive, right? Naming conflict. Okay, again, because Power BI is coming from a machine readability perspective, and you cannot have things classified like this, right? You can't have two columns that are different but named the same. Okay, so we've got to back it up. So let's get out of the promoted headers. This is what I ultimately do when you have the Sunday afternoon baseball treat of a double header, right? Remember? Double header. A blanket ghost header because this doesn't have a double header. So you've got a single hierarchy, single level hierarchy column here. And then you essentially have a two hierarchy column here where we don't just care about labor, we care about labor hours and cost. And the same for equipment hours and cost, etc. So this is what you do, okay? You bring it in here, you go to transform, transpose, okay? And then we use the first row as headers. We rename this to say category. And beauty. Now we can leave it like this, but blanks. So we got our columns cleaned up, but what about our labels here? Well, again, this is not necessarily foolproof, but you can quickly do where is it here? You can do a fill down. Okay, watch this. A fill down. Why is the fill down not working? Okay, so let's go to replace values. No. Okay, now we do a fill down. So there we go. So sometimes, again, another quirk, right? Looks blank, right? It's not blank. Null is blank, okay? In this case, there's actually it's like bizarro world, right? Where philosophy meets Power BI. We essentially have nothing that is being treated as something because it's not letting me fill it down, right? I'm trying to say, hey, put labor here, hey, put equipment here, put materials here. And it's saying, no, no, there's something there, there's a ghost. Okay. So anyway, that's just another workaround I didn't expect to have to do. But there we go. And then we say, okay, perfect. We got the phase, labor, right? We've vectorized this. We turned it into a row essentially, right? Labor hours, labor cost. But we've got columns up here. So it's in good shape. You could model it like this, but this is now going to be a column, right? First of all, this is not phase. We need to say that this would be cost breakdown. And these are phases and disciplines. Well, we've now lost that columnar hierarchy. It's been mixed around and we've lost that delineation. We've lost that grouping. So this is similarly not workable. So what you do, one simple way to do it, if you have extra columns, you can do an unpivot other. If you have only a few columns, you can just click the ones you want to pivot. But this step right here, this is where if if you add a new cost breakdown, right? Remember our Excel? So if you say, oh, we're going to add consumables now, you can see I added that after I had pulled it into query. It's not going to pick up. And in fact, when I do the unpivots, I'll show you. If you go to, again, transform, unpivot, unpivot columns. Okay, so yeah, we can leave that at value. You can see its numbers. Now we would call this phase discipline or whatever we had it in the sheet. Category cost breakdown. So I forget what I was saying, but we now have everything organized as we want it. But oh, I know what I was going to say. So this one right here, if you look at this, so you can look at the advanced editor. Okay, if you click on home, advanced editor, editor, it'll show you your M code essentially, right? So this is I'm doing clicks and drop down moves here, but this is it's getting turned into M code, and then M code feeds the machine, right? So you can see here this one right here, unpivoted columns, cost breakdown, category, attribute, value, okay? So it has, if you look here, it basically takes the cost breakdown and category as the ones that we say we're going to stay put, and we unpivot these ones here, foundation, structure, finishing, we unpivot them into their own column. Well, that is where it's going to fail if you add a new column, right? If you've done unpivoted columns. So the long and short of it is you can add rows with ease, right? I can add rows here, but if I add a column, depending on the transformations, it could break here. And so when you go to refresh your data, say someone's added that new cost breakdown column and you didn't know about it, you weren't told, and then you go to refresh and it errors out, you go in here, you'll find it pretty quickly. But it still is something that is not efficient. Right? It's not an efficient use of time. Anyway, I've remodeled it here, and let's see if it can load. So when we now look at it in the table, see how it's all cleaned up? So we want that down here. We want cost breakdown here. We want category here. Maybe we want category down here. So now you can see we've got our cost breakdown, our phase discipline, our category, whether cost or hours, and our value, all totaling, right? It's totaling nicely. And we can do fancy stuff now. Yeah, so fancy, a slicer. You can do this though, and do cost breakdown, labor, okay? You can even do it like this. Say you're like, I don't like the cost in hours, kind of like that. Well, you can pivot it so that, again, this would be pivoted by, yeah, hours and cost. I would even say we go category column. Yeah, maybe that complicates it. You can look at it like this, though, or go back to the table, or again, setting it up in a way where you've got slicers. So say I only cared about equipment, and I only care about, say I only care about cost. Okay. So I can just click on the different cost breakdowns and I can get those totals pretty quickly. Or again, if I've simplified it and I've already filtered out, I only care about cost, well, then I can flip it into a pivot table and you can see it's only showing me cost anyway. So you can ditch this. And now you've just got your table and you've got it all summed up nicely. Got your finishing by cost breakdown, right? You've got your labor, you've got your materials all by cost breakdown. And so again, you can see that this is how we want it to look. This is vectorization of your table, where this right here is a coordinate determined by all preceding row data in the associated columns before it. I explained that really convolutedly. But basically, you've got everything contained within a row, right? So you've got your upper grouping, and then underneath, everything is grouped, right? There's other things you can do in query to group this even more specifically. Say you only cared about labor, say you only cared about equipment. But this is how it would be for a machine readability perspective. This is how we want it. This right here will cause you headaches. If this is the final mile, this is perfectly fine. But if this is an intermediate step in preparing the data for something like this, right, where we're graphing things, then you need to have it in a position like this. So best case scenario, you get it in this position at base, right? So we're querying in this. And again, in Excel, it's easier to run graphs like this. So even if you're doing your graphs in Excel, the table is the log. The table is not the dashboard. If it is the dashboard, human intuition will likely have you set it up like this, because this is not as intuitive, right? But it's more machine readable. So anyway, this is just it's really not, most software will do this already, but for any data that you're preparing in Excel and you want to model that data, you should really work to getting it into a kind of what I'm calling a vectorized state, right? Get it into this state at base so that we don't have to do any of this extra risky querying. You can, this is what, like 10 steps. So try to get it into this position first so that your query is just ready to go. So I don't even know how long I took. Wow, 23 minutes, savage. But if you stuck with me, again, obviously more focused on project controls perspective, but this is really a broader, dare I say, broader philosophical concept around how we group and manipulate data, information, right? Project information. We essentially, a project is so complex, or so much happening at once, and it's all multifaceted. And as a project controls team, we are trying to essentially gather that data in a way that makes us like wizards, right? So it's all about speed and reliability. And this kind of data right here, this is like I can't even think of an analogy right now, but it's just less stable. So try to get away from ornamenting your data like this if it is simply a step in getting the data into a position where you've got pie charts and your graphs and all the different fancy stuff that you're doing, right? If this is the end goal, then I strongly suggest don't set your data source up like this. But just my 2 cents. If you've stuck with me, that's it's a miracle in and of itself. Another data miracle. Until next time.